hero has a backstory, has an origin story. So we have Spider-Man, Superman, whatever, comic heroes, and so on and so forth. All of them have certain origin stories. The origin stories certainly go something like that. They were born and brought up with certain attributes which were not recognized in the beginning, but gradually, due to whatever circumstances, they rose up to challenge, and they became the, the superhero or whatever hero they became later on. The entity that is the entity that we are talking about is Europe. The hero that we are talking about at the moment is Europe, and Europe also has a origin story. Europe also has an origin story. All of the major contributions of humanity historically have been originated in Europe. That is mathematics, philosophy, logic, history or historiography or study of history, sociology, and so on and so forth. All of these uh, in a systematic form were originated in Europe, and that too in a particular part of Europe, Greece. And due to certain circumstances in which obviously Muslims contributed, uh, Europe fell into dark ages. And through the internal struggle of dark ages, it rose up again after the age of enlightenment and age of discovery and so on and so forth, and reached the deserving place it has now. That is the emergence, re-emergence of the hero again. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to look at this backstory, this origin story of Europe, uh, and Greece as the civilizational sort of fountain or font of mathematics, logic, philosophy, and so on and so forth. And here there are plenty of decolonial intellectuals, historians, mathematicians, and so on and so forth, or philosophers of history and so on, who have contributed. I'm focusing on 3 or 4. Mainly, I've sent the articles by Martin Bernal and C.K. Raju. So Martin Bernal is more sort of a historian who studied the influence of Egyptian or North African culture or the North African society on Greece. And C.K. Raju similarly goes on to study various other parallel systems which developed in the world of philosophy, logic, mathematics, and so on and so forth. So Martin Bernal talks about these 3 key figures in Greek history and analyzes how they recognize themselves, the influence of Egypt or North Africa onto the Greek culture, the classical Greek culture or Hellenistic culture. So he talks about Isocrates, Plato, and Aristotle, these 3 key figures. So Isocrates was a philosopher orator in 436 BC, and he wrote an influential book or tract called Busiris. In Busiris, he fundamentally talks about a mythical entity, mythical hero, Busiris, a lawgiver, a lawmaker. And this lawmaker is coming from Egypt. So in this tract of his, he portrays a very, very impressive picture of Egypt and its people. He portrays Egypt as the most blessed land in the world. And then he goes on to talk about how much he admires the caste system of Egypt, the rulership of the philosophers, and the rigor of the Egyptian philosophers and the priests. What he talks about is that because of this caste system, this important caste system of the Egyptian society, it allowed the Egyptian priests to a leisure, and which allowed them to develop learning. And therefore, above all of this, the philosophia, that is, the philosophy was developed and in Egypt and can only be seen as the true product of Egypt. This is Isocrates in 436 BC, or around that particular time writing about Egypt. Isocrates then talks about that how he laments how Sparta was a small sort of city state in what we collectively called Greece. And he talks about how Spartans failed to apply the Egyptian principles, the Egyptian principles of governance. The Egyptian principle of governance were division of labor, that is the caste system, and the constitution. Therefore, the Spartan system or the Spartan society is falling short of the perfection of the Egyptian model, which they should be emulating. And he writes, a philosopher who undertake to discuss such topics, that is the governance of the society, and have won the greatest reputation, prefer above all others the Egyptian form of governance. That is, Isocrates is taking Egyptian model as the fundamental model that Greeks, different city-states of Greece should be emulating. Now, similarly, Plato, who was a contemporary and a rival of Isocrates, wrote Republic, and there are striking similarities between Republic, written by Plato, and Busiris, written by Isocrates. In Plato's Republic, there is also a division of labor based on the castes, where the society is ruled by the enlightened guardians, or the priests, or the philosophers, who are produced by careful selection and education in the right mode. Plato goes on further in Phaedros, where he writes, because Plato is writing via Socrates, in the sense that Socrates is a character in Plato's writings. So in Plato's writing in Phaedros, Socrates, the character Socrates, declares that he thought the Egyptian god of wisdom was the one who invented numbers and arithmetic and geometry, and most important of all, letters. So Plato here is writing that it is basically Egyptian god of wisdom thought who invented numbers, arithmetic, geometry, and so on and so forth. In similar tracts, Philebos and Epinomis, Plato goes on to write in much more detail how thought did whatever he did. He created writing, language, all of the sciences, and so on and so forth. And this thought is not a Greek god, but an Egyptian god of wisdom. Plato was so much impressed, or so much enamored, or so much enamored by the Egyptian culture, Egyptian sciences, mathematics, philosophy, and so on and so forth, that he was mocked by his contemporary. One of the writers who came later on, few generations after Plato, his name was Crantor. Crantor writes about Plato that Plato's contemporaries mocked him, saying that he was not the inventor of his republic, but that he copied Egyptian institutions. Plato attached so much, I'm quoting Crantor, Plato attached so much importance to the mockers that he attributed to the Egyptians the story of Athenians and Atlanteans, to make them say that Athenians had really lived under this regime of Egyptians. So basically, what Plato is saying is that whatever Athenians or Greeks learned were learned by the Egyptians, because they were under the rule of Egyptians. So for Plato, if you want to go back to the ancient Greek culture, or if you want to revive the Athenian institutions, you have to turn back to Egypt. This is how much the importance to Egypt was given by Plato. Similarly, Plato's pupil, Aristotle, was completely emulating Egyptian culture, and so on and so forth. So Plato not only studied at the academy, but he also studied for 16 months in Egypt. Plato wanted to get into the Egyptian academy so much that he shaved his head so that he can study with Egyptian priests and learn the philosophy, mathematics, and so on and so forth that they were teaching there. Aristotle writes that he is writing about Egypt. Egypt was the cradle of mathematics because the caste of the priests was given great leisure. The priests had invented mathematical arts, which included geometry, arithmetic, and astronomy, which Greeks were beginning to possess. And this is Aristotle writing that the Greeks are beginning to possess these particular mathematical arts. All of these writings by, whether these writings are truly by Aristotle, Plato, Isocrates, and so on and so forth, we do not know whether these can be rightly attributed to these authors. But one thing is very sure, that whoever these authors are, they were very much impressed by the Egyptian culture, and they were attributing the Greek progress in whatever modes, that is philosophy, sciences, mathematics, logic, and so on and so forth, to the learning that they got from Egypt. So much so that one of the key figures, or the father of history, Herodotus, who is a Greek historian, who was a Greek historian, attributes that that Pythagoras, that is the Greek mathematician, studied in Egypt for 21 years, and he came back to Greece and basically spread the ideas that he studied in Egypt from Egyptian priests. So all of these ideas, that is the Greek, that is the Greece as being the fountain, as the ex nihilo creator of philosophy, mathematics, and logic, are being refuted clearly by the Greek, Athenian, Spartan authors, and authors of some stature, such as Plato, Aristotle, Isocrates, and so on and so forth, and Herodotus as well. So we clearly see that through the Greek sources, this particular idea is not supported. So how did this idea come into being? That is Greece is the fountain or the origin of civilization or mathematics and philosophy and sciences and so on and so forth. Martin Bernal attributes this particular mythification of history to 4 factors, and he goes on to say that he goes on to list these factors. So the first factor he lists is Christian reaction. That is he doesn't talk about the Christianity, the original Christianity. He's talking about Nicene Christianity, or the Christian church, which came later on. That is the first factor. That is the second factor, is that Martin Bernal says is the rise of concept of progress. The third one is the growth of white supremacism or the racism. And the fourth one, he says, is romantic Hellenism. And he goes on to discuss all of these factors briefly. So regarding Christian reaction, he talks about 3 or 4 main characters. One is Richard Bentley. Richard Bentley was a contemporary of Newton, and he was one of the first sort of a man to popularize Newtonian physics. And what he did is, with Newtonian physics, as we know that in Newtonian physics, the idea is that you recognize the elements, or you break down the nature into fundamental elements which interact to give you certain natural dynamic or natural sciences or natural behavior. So the recognition of these elements have to be there, and these elements are inanimate elements. So Richard Bentley goes on and takes this Newtonian idea of nature and sort of extrapolates this particular idea of Newtonian physics or Newtonian understanding of nature into governance as well as theology. So what he says is that as the matter could not move, this is Richard Bentley, as the matter could not move, a God of generally regular habits was needed to create and maintain the universe, just as king was necessary to control the constitutional monarchy. So from here we see that the ideas of sciences were basically being extrapolated into politics, into theology, into society in general. And Bentley Bentley collaborated with various other figures, various other scientific figures, such as Anglo-Irish chemist Robert Boyle, people who have studied chemistry in GCSE or high school or some such level would remember Boyle's law in chemistry we studied. And Robert Boyle, again, used all of these ideas of scientific progress to counteract notorious infidels. And by notorious infidels, what he meant was atheists, various kinds of theists, pagans, Jews, and what he calls Mahometans, which are Muslims. So these are the characters who have to be counteracted by the knowledge that is being propped up and attributed to the Greeks. Similarly, there was another character, Bishop William Warburton, English bishop. He took a slightly different approach, and he was in 1730s. What he said is that even though we cannot deny the Egyptian role or the role of Egyptian religion in the Greek sciences, Greek philosophy, Greek mathematics, and so on and so forth, uh, what happened is that originally Egyptian society was a monotheistic society, like the Christian society, but it fell into the wrong hands of politicians. Therefore, it was destroyed, and it was the remnants of this Egyptian society, which was a monotheistic society, were purified and retained and refined by the Greeks, which were uh, further discovered or rediscovered by the Europeans and therefore reestablished within the Christendom. So for Bishop Warburton, Greeks came later on, and that is what made them better compared to Egyptians. They excelled their teachers because they came later on. And we can see that this is a mix of religion plus the idea of progress. That is, historically, human beings are moving forward, progressing to higher levels of understanding, morality, and so on and so forth. He, we are talking about Bishop Warburton. He also maintained that while Pythagoras studied in Egypt, it was only when he returned to Greece that he set out his theorems. That is, the heathen Egypt was only good to impart this particular understanding, this particular mathematical knowledge, but it was not the right environment for Pythagoras to lay down a formal axiomatic systemic system of mathematics or his theorems. And similarly, Martin Bernal talks about Jacob Brucker. He was a German historian, and Jacob Brucker dismisses all of the Egyptian philosophers as theogonists or theogonists, and he says that basically they were some sort of a proto-philosophers, and the philosophy itself truly began with pre-Socratics. Pre-Socratics were Ionians and basically the Greeks who were in various islands. So it was an outright dismissal of all of the contributions of Egyptians per se, as well as the influence of Egypt uh, on the Greek sort of philosophy, mathematics, and so on and so forth, because all of that was some sort of a mishmash of theology. But the real philosophy only began with Greeks. We see the similar sort of attitudes when you see the study of Indian philosophy or Chinese philosophy or Arabic philosophy. That is, the Arabic philosophy or the Indian philosophy and so on and so forth was for a very long time, even now, is labeled as Islamic philosophy or Hindu philosophy and so on. That is, all of these philosophy or the Buddhist philosophy, right? So all of these systems of philosophy were not real systems of philosophies. They were basically theologies. These primitive people were trying to figure out a way of living their lives, but they were not philosophizing or they were not creating philosophical systems. which only Greeks and therefore Europeans did. So all this sort of this sort of idea of progress started to emerge in Europe around 17th and 18th century. And then Europe was seen or labeled as a progressive continent. That is, with the defeat of Muslims in 1680s, and with the defeat of Muslims in 1680s, you see political philosophers like Montesquieu and so on and so forth. They came up and they basically again disparaged the Egyptian systems of philosophy and the governance and so on into a nice little sort of placeholder called Oriental wisdom. So Egyptians, whatever Egyptians did were Oriental wisdom, but what Europe did was natural philosophy. What Greeks did was natural philosophy. What Europe did was natural philosophy. What Egyptians did was Oriental wisdom. And this is a similar thing which you will see the Chinese philosophy and the Japanese philosophy, even though they took massive chunks of from Gita, they took various chunks from Buddhist tracts and so on and so forth, but they attributed all of this to some sort of a Oriental wisdom, but not as a proper system of philosophy or axiomatic system of philosophy. What the idea here is that even though the borrowing is there, the wholesale borrowing of ideas, system, and so on, ideas, systems, and theories is done by Europe, the cultural pride of Europe must be maintained. That is because only in these lands of Europe, these primitive ideas were refined and given a proper structure and the proper place that they have now. So therefore, the Europe itself became the cradle of progress. That is, all of the progress, all of the roads basically lead to Europe. Now, the emergence of idea of race as the absolute category also played its role in this. Aristotle writes about this, and Aristotle peddled a particular idea of geographical races and how geographical races translate into genetic superiority of certain particular races. So I'm reading what Aristotle wrote regarding this. The races that live in cold regions and those of Europe are full of courage and passion, but somewhat lacking in skill and brain power. For this reason, while remaining generally independent, they lack political cohesion and the ability to rule others. On the other hand, Asiatic races have both brains and skills, but are lacking in courage and willpower. So they remained both enslaved and subject. The Hellenic race, that is the Greeks, occupying a mid position geographically, has a measure of both. Hence, it has continued to be free, to have the best political institution, and to be capable of ruling others given a single constitution. And here we see a natural emergence of natural master and slave dynamic. That is, it is genetically, naturally assigned, the Greeks have been naturally assigned a role to rule others. In this particular way, Aristotle linked racial superiority to the right to enslave other people. And other people, the slavish disposition, that is the Asiatics, even though they had the brain and so on and so forth, they lacked the willpower. And the similar sort of thing is present in Hegel. And similar sort of, even though Marx doesn't go into the similar sort of mode, but Marx is talking about Asiatic mode of production, in which he attributes, he hand waves and attributes all of the Asiatic production into some sort of a despotic production, and therefore the European mode of production as much more democratic and superior mode of production. So all of these are pretty much linked as a chain, a logical chain, Aristotle, Hegel, Marx, and so on and so forth, into the racial superiority of Europe. Various other philosophers of Europe, such as John Locke and so on, John Locke, David Hume, Benjamin Franklin, all of these openly expressed opinions that people who were non-Europeans were mentally, not only mentally inferior, but they were also morally inferior. Therefore, it was right for the Europeans to rule them, to govern them, and to give them a particular law. In Hume's case, David Hume's case, his racism transcended the conventional religion, conventional Christianity, and he proposed an idea that there was not one creation of man, but different stages of creations of man. So the highest creation of man was European man or European woman, and the in the race, that is that in which the Europeans are on the top of the tree, and you have chimps, and next to the chimps and the apes you have Africans, and so on and so forth. So the scientific racism is much more natural, naturally and philosophically institutionalized here. There were some oppositions. There was some opposition to these particular ideas, such as Rousseau. So Rousseau, in his Social Contract, published in 1762, attacked any kind of justification of slavery. But he went back to Aristotle's ideas, that is, that geography determines the intellectual superiority and virtue of the people. Therefore, Europe, or North Europe, was the true repository of human virtue. And therefore, it has the natural right to give the law, not to enslave others, but to educate others, to give them the right natural law, so that they can behave, they can evolve, and they can reach the same stages which the Europeans have reached. So, I mean, I would end this sort of a presentation here. There are a couple of parts regarding mathematics and logic, the emergence of mathematics and logic, which we should, if we want to talk about this later, we can talk about that, the emergence of logic and mathematics, especially in the Buddhist, Jain, and other systems, other sort of philosophical systems. But one thing is very sure, that Europe's origin story, that is Greece as the origin of philosophy, mathematics, and so on and so forth, and specifically ex nihilo origin of these particular sciences, doesn't match, doesn't verify. And if we believe these particular ideas without questioning, then we are following Eurocentric, or if not Euro supremacist sort of path. That's it. Thank you.
What is mean by philosophy in a Western perspective?
I mean,
because in Indian perspective is different than Western.
Yeah, in Chinese perspective, Indian perspective, all of these perspectives, the ideas are different, slightly different, but our understanding that these ideas are significantly different is also problematic. In the Western context, the definition that is given, if you join a philosophy 101 course, the idea is given that it is philosophia, that is love of Sophia, and so on and so forth, right? Love of truth, or love of knowledge, or love of wisdom, right? But this similarly, seeking of wisdom or seeking of happiness, for example, if you study any Neoplatonist or Aql Kalam sort of school of philosophers in Muslim sort of schools, you will see that they are talking about similar things. The highest virtue that should be pursued is happiness. That they propose that the highest virtue we should pursue is happiness, and knowledge is the path to refine this happiness, to find and refine this happiness. Therefore, knowledge becomes extremely important. and the love of knowledge. Similar sort of thing is present in Buddhist or Brahminist or Jain or Chinese, Taoist, and so on and so forth philosophies. So what I'm saying is that this idea that the conception of physics is fundamentally different in European or Greek philosophy compared to Indian or Chinese or Japanese or Arab Central Asian philosophies is problematic, is a Eurocentric sort of or Euro-supremacist idea itself, which is used further on to dismiss any other system as the proper system of philosophy.
I think now in the post sort of colonial literature, all this is sort of accounted for, that, you know, there has been this Eurocentric view of everything, the Orientalism and things. But I wonder why it is still that the sort of South hasn't been able to provide an alternative, systematic body of knowledge that puts forward an alternative to the Western perspective. So it still critiques it in bits, and but you haven't got a sort of, you know, Eastern version of what was happening in collectively. You know, I think, say, India does it and China does it and Africa sort of begins to do it, but there isn't a collective body of knowledge that says at the same time as these you know, Greek philosophies were developing, there was a body of alternative literature that we can look to as well, that says things in a different way. So, for, you know, for example, also, I mean, we've looked at caste and things. So in India, you couldn't say that there wasn't a system of inequalities and even sort of verging on the racism, but it was casteism. And similarly in China there were, but there isn't a body, do you understand what I mean? There isn't a body of knowledge that says there was also an alternative now to look at.
It's an excellent question if people want to engage with.
Unmute.
Unmute.
Yeah, I found this all very interesting because I've had a similar battle within a University of the Third Age philosophy group that I'm in, and that sort of there's still this thing, certainly in the West, that sort of the classical philosophers are the starting point of everything, and that sort of, and this seems to be at least partly perpetuated in universities, in that you've got a whole generation of philosophy professors that sort of were brought up with this very Eurocentric view. They're the ones that are producing the books with, you know, the 30 most important philosophers and what have you. And they're all Western ones, you know. I mean, I think it's when you've got this inequality and Eurocentrism in anything, it tends to perpetuate itself and is very difficult to overcome. And there's this thing that somehow Western philosophy is still the baseline on which you judge anything in the majority world. Whereas, you know, I think that's the wrong way of looking at it. So I think, you know, I found it very interesting, this, that sort of, as I say, that sort of, this seems to be an unchanged situation in sort of philosophy groups and what have you in the West. And I do seem to be out on my own most of the time in it because of that.
You know, to get your published papers and to get yourself recognized as a scholar, you first have to start from the West to show that you know you're up to it and you know all this knowledge, and then you begin to critique it. But then by the time you've critiqued it, you've finished half your paper or half your book and stuff. And so, you know, that might be one thing that prevents it. But I still think that there is, you know, there are very, very good scholars out there that know their own histories and could produce something that was alternative. Maybe the publishers are not looking for that. I don't know. I'm not sure.
About Western philosophy and European philosophy. I think if you read Indian philosophy, especially ancient Indian philosophy, and you compare with the European philosophy, uh, I think European philosophy will look like very backward, because in Indian philosophy is older than European philosophy. And what I think when I read literature and I notice, I think the European philosophers have borrowed from the ancient Indian philosophy. If you read about Sankhya, they talk about mathematics. Sankhya means number. Means in ancient India, Sankhya philosophy was based on numbers. So if you read in details how much they advance in mathematics. Also, if you read about Vaisheshika, who give the name of atom. Atom came and they defined the uh, molecules. Also, they identified at that time, I think it is a 1 millennium BC, they identified what is the smallest particle we can see. And they said, uh, uh, like two atoms, when they combine, it becomes one molecules. So 6 molecule, when they combines, it can be visible. And later benzenes, European scientists, they found the benzenes is the smallest visible element. Okay, there are another Indian philosophers are the pure materialistic. If you will see, like Ajivika philosophers, they philosophize what is the smallest particle, and they give the names of that particles like atoms, molecules, etc. And Vaisheshika developed this philosophy. If you note down this, it is very helpful. And if you read this is very old philosophy than European philosophy. And Charvaka, it is a pure materialistic philosophy. And uh, they believe only just one source of knowledge to remove all other doubts. And they were believing in a direct perspective. They reject inference. And others, there are some beliefs like Vaisheshika, they believe only two sources of knowledge. One is a direct perspective, another is inference. So there are another philosophy, Nyaya. They believe in a 4 source of knowledge. So if you read this and compare both of them, I think they have borrowed everything from them. They talk about evolution, they talk about mathematics, they talk about physics. And interestingly, there are 9 philosophy ancient India before Greece. And out of 9, 8 philosophies are atheistic. So they don't have a concept of God at that time. Only the 9th philosophy, the Vedanta, they believe in God. That's all I want to say.
No, I don't want to say anything now.
Surinder raised, even though we talk about all of this, why isn't there a credible alternate system to these particular systems or Eurocentric systems? I mean, my personal opinion is that we are all product of Europe. And whether we are talking about decolonial philosophies or decolonial systems, the decolonization is happening within the colonial system. There are systems which are trying to work, or they are out of this particular colonial system. uh, but then they are labeled or mislabeled or misconstrued and tarred as various other things, which I'll mention in a second. What I'm trying to say is that C.K. Raju writes something very important. That is, he says that children do not question the first story you tell them, but later on, if you tell them a contrary sort of thing to that first story, they are going to ask you proofs of that. Similarly, all of us, all of the educated non-Europeans and Europeans have been told this particular story uh, in their gripe water, that the civilization started with the philosophies, the mathematics, the histories, and all of these axiomatic systematical studies have started with Greeks. And we have accepted this hook, line, and sinker. Now, there are obviously post-colonial thinkers, but the post-colonial thinkers themselves are using the systems such as Marxist system. A lot of them are using Marxist system or feminist system and so on and so forth, which are European systems, which see through a particular, they are part of a particular long line of evolution of European thought. So saying simply that these particular systems can be used to refute the European or Euro supremacist or Eurocentric systems, I don't think that is possible. Or if it is possible, there are limitations to it. For example, a lot of post-colonial or decolonials use the postmodernists as or postmodernist theoreticians as sort of their ideas to destabilize modern ideas or the European ideological sort of thoughts. But then postmodern thought itself is a European thought, or at least their systems are European systems. Now, the only system, there are a couple of systems which I personally see which exist out of this colonial framework. One of them is the Buddhist system, the other is the Islamic system of thought. But Buddhist system has been tarred as some sort of a wishy-washy new age system in which you meditate for 15 minutes and you reach nirvana. And Islamic system of thought has been tarred as some sort of, if you study that, you are a terrorist in making. So both of these systems are pretty much, no one takes them that is that yeah that's the, if you talk, they are Brahminist philosophical systems are very strong. For example, we talked about structuralism in previous discussions. The father of structuralism is generally given as some sort of a European chapter for what's his name starts with P and
Louis Strauss.
Levi Strauss. Yeah, Levi Strauss. Thank you. But if we look at the ideas that there are structures present in language and societies and so on and so forth, specifically language, it was present in Panini. Panini was a Sanskrit grammarian born in what is now Afghanistan. So was Brahminist, Aryan Brahminist, but his tract is even studied now as example of how the rules of grammar should be developed, how you should study language in a methodical, systematic form. So yes, they have, I mean, that is a credible system, but we see the problem with that as well. I mean, it is going to take Islam seriously, but it is going to call it Islamic anarchism, Islamic feminism, Islamic socialism, and so on and so forth. Islam ends at socialism, Islam ends at Marxism. Similarly, you can talk about Buddhist anarchism and so on.
Yeah. Very interesting, Saif, your talk. It's a very complicated subject you picked on. and it's not something we can do justice by reading it at 5 o'clock and then trying to comment on it. But anyway, I think the gist of, if I got it right, if I understood you correctly, the gist being that the Europeans claim to be the leaders in the philosophy, in creating the philosophy, is somewhat not true. I think I do agree with that, and I just want to make a quick point. Reading an article written by Radha D'Souza, marking the anniversary of the October Revolution. And I wish I had read that before I'm going to make a comment now. And it was very fascinating for me to read that, what actually gave rise to the October Revolution? Was it Marx? Was it the industrialization of Europe that actually gave rise, that was the birthplace for the October Revolution? And she actually says that, sorry, she actually doesn't say the working class movement. It was the anti-imperialist struggle. When did the anti-imperialist struggle start? Did the anti-imperialist struggle start after October Revolution, or did it actually start before the October Revolution? Which I found a very fascinating, because I was until recently, I thought, after the October Revolution, the whole world erupted. India erupted, Africa erupted, everywhere. There was an eruption of anti-imperialist struggle. But if we actually go back, that the anti-imperialist struggle happened in the Ottoman Empire, during the Egyptian rules, and all sorts of things like that. And that gave rise to the development of Europe to what it was, because Europe was actually an imperialist development. And then came out of this whole thing, the Industrial Revolution, the acquiring of wealth and the acquiring of knowledge to develop science and technology, and then a whole wave of new form of imperialism started. And nobody actually remembers, if I got it right, nobody actually remembers that, there were so many struggles against imperialism prior to 1917, October Revolution. And nobody actually has a real recollection of those imperialist struggles. And you could be told, basically, all I have to contribute a lot, but suffice to say that we are to that whole knowledge. Europe, very well researched, I think. Thank you.
Yes, Kalpana.
Thank you. Thanks. This very interesting discussion. A lot of my sort of understanding of, very little of the understanding comes from trying to watch some of the BBC 4 documentaries and things. I think there is a recognition that knowledge and ideas spread across the world, and it's not, it didn't originate in Europe. I think there's beginning of understanding of that. It's recognized by academics. what Surinder was saying, I think there is a lot of that sort of text and things in relation to India. They talk about Nalanda University having documents and things like that, but I think there's not enough spread of that knowledge, and it tends to be used in language. A lot of the ideas and things, say, if I try to read that in Marathi, I really don't understand it, even though I understand Marathi, because it's just, it's, very sort of like terms and things, ideas are become quite complicated because the language is limited. And I think that's where what Saif is saying, that a lot of the people who are educated in the Western style of education, language, or method. And so even if I have interest in trying to understand the original documents and things, I'd find it difficult. But I think when I was at school, I keep saying that post-independence, I keep talking about the education in India, in Maharashtra anyway. They talked about the history of particularly development of and spread of Buddhism, and talk about the exchanges. I mean, who had Ben, who came from China, and all that. That sort of thing was part of our learning, in that sort of but that seems to have disappeared now in the current generation. I don't think any of that would even learn something like that in school. So there is slowly taking over of the Western ideas and things. So I think that's becoming more difficult. So instead of decolonizing ourselves after independence, it seems to have gone the other way. I think also, I think there's also confusion in my mind anyway, with science, philosophy versus religion, because, and that's where if you like, the leftist ideas and progressive ideas get confused, because if you're trying to understand and be against caste, you tend to end up being very anti-religious, and forget about the God question, but and then it becomes quite complicated how you actually put. So a lot of the ideas, scientific ideas and things that are put in terms of religious terms and things, are quite difficult to either argue against or learn from. So like Maqbul was saying, this thought about light, atom, looking at creation and things, they were put in very scientific way, but it becomes very difficult. And so that's where the domination of the control of the West comes in, in even spreading of the ideas and things. And yet I don't think that was the case. I mean, there was a flow of ideas and people and knowledge, between East, Middle East and West. Sorry, that's all.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Naeem?
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think it's a bit confusing because, we can't really put everything in pigeonholes, saying this is Western philosophy and this is Eastern philosophy, because knowledge is a continuum, isn't it? It's a historical thing. It continues, and at any particular historic epoch, it is the ideas of the dominant power that dominates. So I think, I think Marx said that as well, but I mean, basically, so we can't really say that there's a parallel, several different trends of philosophy. Philosophy is picking up from each other, isn't it? It's the Greeks contributed, the Muslims in their era contributed when they were the dominant force, and the Egyptians contributed. But at the end of the day, what we have got is a system that that has derived from all those historically, and is now the dominant power. So it's the Western thinking and Western ideology and Western science is dominant because it is ruling over the world, and we can't just say that we've got to throw that out. What we've got to do is to change the power balance. The science itself is, I could even argue, is neutral, and the philosophy is basically what you're peddling, isn't it? So a philosopher could be selling, you can have fascist ideology and there will be a philosophy behind it. Could be selling fascism, or it could be selling socialism, and that will have its own ideology behind it. So the other thing I don't understand is, you see, what the question we need to be looking at is, what have we got to do in the present era to actually confront this dominant power, and how do we change that balance of power? And I think that is where our efforts should be going, rather than denouncing, the Greeks 4,000 years ago, because they are part of our history. And how much you define Greek to be part of Europe, because it's on the borders with the Middle East, with Asia. In fact, it's debatable as well.
Fluid identity.
You can't deny it. It does not take side with the working class or the proletariat or the peasant.
It helps if you have more nukes on you. If your country has more nukes, it does help, right?
I want to bring
what Kalpana was saying is quite interesting, because this is I'm talking in the context of India, that the Aryan Brahmin, the Hindu nationalists started publications of, they have been doing this for X number of years, and even before partition, they have been working on creating this mythological history of how all of this, and it is very similar to European sort of mythology, mythic history. That is, everything started from Greece, Europe, and similarly everything started with the Hindus, later became Hindus, and everything started with India. India is the center of it. Culture, wisdom, etc., etc. Deny everything else. Everything went out from here. So they started rewriting sort of mathematics books in this particular thing, in this particular vein. So what does Indian left do? Indian left produced a book, sort of writing how the mathematical ideas, philosophical ideas came from Greece and so on and so forth. And these particular books had pictures of people, so these philosophers. So you have Euclid, and you have Socrates, you have Plato, you have Aristotle, you have all sorts of philosophers, Herodotus, and so on and so forth. And all of these look European. So the question that did not arise in the minds of those people who were writing Indian left was, how do they know that Euclid was a white man? Euclid, for a very long time, Euclid was supposed to be born in, even now, they believe that he was born and brought up in Alexandria, which is Africa. The Muslim historians wrote that he was born in Tyre, which is Lebanon. So none of these places are places of white Europeans. But Indian left didn't ask these questions. They just portrayed it because they wanted to counteract the Hindu nationalists. And therefore, to counteract Hindu nationalists, you need European nationalism or European supremacism. Yeah. This is the counterbalance that Indian left has got. This is why I'm saying that left is not capable of counteracting this. The left is the product of Europe, and it will eventually fall back to its mother ideology, that is Eurocentrism. Similarly, Maqbul talked something very, very basic and very, very important, very fundamental. That is the systems of logic and philosophies if we look at the Buddhist system, if you look at the Brahmin system, if you look at the Jain system, Charvaka system, and so on and so forth, they are extremely complex systems. The system that we talked about, I mean, Tom and I were talking a couple of weeks back about logic, dialectical logic. So we just a question propped up, and it is a very common question. What other kind of logic do you have? So the answer is simple: Aristotelian logic, right? The logic that Aristotle gave, syllogism, and so on. So these are the only two logics that you have. But this is the level of understanding that we have. We are all educated, but we don't know any other system of logic. That is, you have Nyaya system, you have Buddhist system of logic, which is not a binary system of logic. The Aristotelian logic is a binary system of logic. That is, a statement is true or a statement is false. That's it. There is no other thing. There is no in between. Whereas the Buddhist system of logic has four or five statements of how a statement can be true, false, false and true, neither true nor false, and so on and so forth. And this is written in Digha Nikaya. Digha Nikaya was, Dig basically means big, Nikaya means collection, so big collection. So big collection of writings. It was the collection started right after the death of Buddha. That is the 7th century. Now people can dispute the dates and so on and so forth, but pretty much like 600 BC, this has been written. And it's a much more complex system.
Sorry, I am interrupting you. Naya
Yeah.
has given 16.
Yeah,
instead of
exactly.
16
Yeah.
different, and it is
Yeah.
available.
Yeah, exactly. So the various, and this system is dismissed by the Europeans and the European ideologies as the system of not a system of logic, which should be taken into account, but a system of some religious mythology. Just that is Buddhism. Same thing with Jains and so on and so forth. And the Brahmins and so on, Nyaya system, like Maqbul was talking about. So these are the systems which are valid systems of study of the nature and how logically we can understand the nature. The logical background of mathematics, which were created, which were present and which were practiced till very late. There is a very important philosopher, present philosopher, Janardhan Ganeri. He was in Oxford, now I think he's in New York University. And he wrote that till 15th and 16th century, 15th and 16th century, these systems were practiced. These systems were developed in India, and there was a connection of scholars from Bengal, that is now Bangladesh, as well as Banaras and Delhi and so on and so forth. And it was not only a Brahmin Hindu system, it was Muslims were participating, Jains were participating, Buddhists were participating, and Brahmins were participating in the system, in developing these systems. But all of this has been systematically wiped out or dismissed within the left and within the broader European ideological systems or pedagogical systems.
Saif, I wanted to ask a question.
Yeah.
My question is, what is wrong with the accepting Eurocentrism? Because I understand that this European philosophy is helping us to understand the world to a great extent. It is also providing us with some ideas about how to bring about changes in this world and how to build a good society. So under the present situation, it is providing us and helping us with a lot of good ideas. So what is wrong with it if you take some ideas from them?
Naeem wants to say something. Naeem, you can't see your hand, you know.
Yeah.
Naeem, your background,
I think I'm gonna take my question off.
sort of blurs
Yeah,
your.
I mean, I think it's getting even worse. I mean, the whole point of it is that, I mean, whatever ideology, whatever philosophy we had 4,000 years ago, it is not going to be a replacement, all right, of our current understanding of the universe.
Yeah.
Because it is well in advance of anything that has gone before. It is nothing to do with the Greeks, the Turks, the Egyptians, or the Arabs, or the Muslims, or the Hindus, Christians. You know, it is humanity that has actually developed that. And I think what the Eurocentric view does is it denies all that development, but borrows from it anyway. Okay, so the Western powers, the Western supremacists, haven't actually denounced those ideologies. I mean, the algorithms, for example, you know, that is an Arabic intervention, all right, in our understanding, and they have adopted it, but they have declared it is theirs and comes from them, all right. So when they paint Jesus Christ as a European, all right, they're not denying Christianity that came from the Middle East. What they're saying is they're adopting it. They're saying it is ours. All right, that's what's wrong with Eurocentricity. It is saying that everything evolved and developed from Europe, and therefore Europe must remain the master forever. This is what we've got to challenge, all right? Not the fact that we are part of the same continuum We are part of the same historical process. You see, the Greek philosophy belongs as much to us in India, all right, as it belongs to Britain, all right, in Europe, right? I don't know, in terms of Asia, probably more parts of Asia are much nearer to Greece than Britain is. So it's that kind of thinking. We are part of one universe, right? And we are part of one humanity. And I think that's where racism comes from. It says no. We have developed everything. There was nothing before us. That's what Eurocentrism is, all right? And we are the people who have actually created everything. And you, for that reason, needs to remain subjugated to us. And that's what we've got to denounce.
Can I answer Thomas' question?
Yeah.
See, we don't have any problem if Europe give a concrete and final philosophy, but it is not possible because it depends upon morality, and morality differs from person to person. And same thing with ethics. And religion cannot give a philosophy, because religion cannot give a liberty to the philosophers. We have seen in the Galileo, So if he thinks that Christianity or Islam or any religion will give a final philosophy, a final the way of life, it is not possible. And in ancient India, at that time, there was no concept of God. Concept of God developed in Brahminism. Before Brahminism, there was no concept of God. So they were liberal, and they philosophize on the basis of three fundamental things, like they say Gnana Mimansa, Tattva Mimansa, and Niti Mimansa. Means what is the basic elements of the nature. And then second, what is the primary source of knowledge. And the third is the ethics. So we cannot agree on one thing. That is why at that time there are several philosophies. All are atheistic philosophy. Even they have some differences. So it is not possible.
They used to hold conventions of debates. I mean, that used to be the way they, in central India, actually, they used to have conventions where they discuss all these ideas as a proper debating society, conferences.
Yeah, but the good thing Europe has taken from India is materialism. Europe has taken materialism from ancient India, and now India has taken the religion from Europe. Hindu is not like Islam and Christianity is the religion, but Hindu was not a religion at that time. Hindu was a dharma. It is a kind of natural laws. The meaning of dharma is the natural laws. So people can philosophize anything, but now they made a religion, Hindu religion. Actually, Buddhism is not a religion. There were no concept of God in Buddhism. They don't believe in God, and they don't believe in self and spirit. Same thing with Jainism. Jainism, they accept there is a self, but they don't believe in God.
Let's make a very quick point here that, the Eurocentric viewpoint seems to, start a history from about 100, 250 years ago. And yet really the history of the world is much older than that. And, what was the history of Europe, before that, after the Christian Crusades and all that, and we had the development around that time, we had the development of the Islamic empires. And, within the Islamic empires, there were rebellions and retaliations and things like that. And so there was, it is not as if there were no people's movement against empires, whether they were Islamic empires or the Ottoman empires or whatever, empires there were. So there is a history of people that culminated into perhaps the formation of the Europeans, 200 years ago, and that led to the development of industrialization. And so there is, and there is I feel that there's a whole negation of that history prior to the industrial revolution that is being ignored, and this is what is giving rise to the Eurocentric view that sort of world just began then. Sorry, that it.
Experiences. If you wipe out these memories, if you wipe out these, distort these memories, experience, or memories of experiences, you change the personality, self-conception of the individual. Eurocentrism does that. It might be benefiting us temporarily or in some small ways, but it is fundamentally distorting the truth. So the question really here is that if it benefits a Black man to join a fascist party, should they join it? Or for that matter, a white man, should they? If it benefits them. That's the question. So the question is a question more or less, your question is the question of question of ethics and morality.
Well, it is.
I mean, from my perspective.
I mean, can I answer Seth's question? I mean, if fascism benefits a particular person, should that person?
No, it's a rhetorical. It's not a question. It's a rhetorical. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Go.
So the point I'm trying to make is this: whether should he join it is one question, which is morally should he join it, or would he join it, which is another question, right? So Marxist understanding is that his interest, which is basically his class interest, would make him join it, but morally, as a human being, he shouldn't join it. So but it would apply universally to everybody.
Jim has something.
Yeah, okay. Who is that?
Jim?
Jim.
Just briefly. I think that the critique that Saif is putting forward on the sort of level of philosophy and knowledge to show that there is a privileged Eurocentric dominance, which has to be criticized, and we have to be aware of it, and has to be attacked, is just another aspect of an overall struggle against imperialism centered on the Europe and America in the world. So on the one hand, there is a political struggle against imperialism, and on the other hand, there are other complementary struggles going on. One of which is this struggle on the level of knowledge and ideology. But I think in the answer to the question of how the knowledge monopoly of Eurocentric values can be combated, is that it will be combated as the imperialist struggle develops. And already the world is not the same as it was when those European empires were able to enforce their values on the world as well as their political power. America and Europe are declining. China and India and the other countries which have suffered from, ex-colonial countries are growing. And as they do so, okay, their educational systems are fairly highly influenced by the European colonial process that they've gone through. But as they grow in power, and as the European American axis declines, so the struggle against those European ideas will also grow. So I don't think you can separate the political, geopolitical struggle against imperialism from the kind of critique that Saif is quite correctly putting forward about on the level of ideas.
Okay, so shall we wind up? It is almost going to be 8:30. Saif, would you like to wind up or just like that?
It's fine. I mean, I quite agree with James's point. This is absolutely important. What he is saying is that the struggle, the challenging of hegemony of European knowledge, or hegemony on the knowledge by Europe, that particular claim must be challenged. And the myths and lies and distortions, which have been ideological distortions and lies and myths, should be exposed. Whether you expose it as an anti-imperialist or as a moralist, ethicist, and so on and so forth, whatever perspective you want to take, it is important to do that. So to create new pedagogies which are representing the facts, or at least as much as we can come to the facts, is extremely important in the process of decolonizing anti-imperialist struggles. And there is a part of this presentation which I left. It was connected with the claim of logic and mathematics, how logic and mathematics have also been claimed into that they originated in Greece. I left that particular part, but it is continuum of this particular thing. So if people want to discuss that, we can discuss it some other time. But yeah, excellent discussion. Thank you.
Some Christmas carol singing, because I have a background in Christianity as well as other things. Anyway, on the farmer struggle in India, there is a stalemate. The government is adamant. What they've said is, okay, we can rubbish everything within the box of the laws they have created. So in other words, what they're saying is you can change and add, subtract whatever you want from the framework of these laws, but we cannot take back these laws. And the farmers are saying, well, you know, what the hell is the purpose of that? And the farmers are saying, no, we want the whole shell and the gubbins of the law to be scrapped. And the reason why the farmers are adamant on that is that the farmers believe that the central government has no constitutional right to meddle with laws that are state subjects. Agriculture is a state subject. And what the central government has done is imposed laws that violate that federal structure. And so whichever way the government runs, it is actually on a back foot. Now, the only, and in the meantime, we are into nearly day 20, 21 of the Delhi siege. Practically all highway accesses to Delhi are blockaded. And the farmers' unions have given, I think there's something like 1.2 million people already surrounding the Delhi. And what the farmers' unions have done is given call for additional farmers to come out and reinforce the blockade. And every day there are reports of 50,000 tractors with 2 carts behind them, 2 trolleys behind them, coming and joining. And in fact, there's a queue right back up to Punjab where people are trying to get to Delhi and they just can't. So the movement is really, really strong. The latest thing what today they have announced, the farmers have announced that they have started their own YouTube channel, which is going to counteract any government propaganda. So there's all sorts of things like that in play from the farmers' point of view. But from the government point of view, what they are doing is creating, or not creating, well, that's probably a wrong word, but they are now trying to start negotiations with the non-farmers unions. In other words, the unions that are their own creations or their own concoctions. And what I think is they're trying to do is to say, look, we have consulted the farmers unions, that those farmers who are actually blockading Delhi are not actually the farmers, that they are Naxalites, they're Khalistanis, they're this and that and the other. So this is the move that the government is trying to do on the one hand. But on the other hand, they have also moved the Supreme Court to say that the farmers who are blocking Delhi are actually, causing disturbances and things like that. The Supreme Court cleverly has come out with a statement saying, the farmers have a legitimate right to do a protest, a peaceful protest. As long as they are doing it peacefully, that's fine. And the Supreme Court of India has now come out with, let us create a panel of discussion. That Supreme Court will create a body that will mediate between the farmers and the government. This is precisely what the government wants anyway, because the farmer says, we will start talking with you when you say we have scrapped these laws, then we will start talking about what the farmers or the agricultural industry needs. So there's a huge stalemate at this moment. Really don't know which way it's going to go. The farmers seems to have literally 90% support from the Delhiites, from the people surrounding them. So it's wait and see, really. I'm not sure that I can add much more to that.
Why are you worried that the government is calling them Maoist? They are Maoist. Villagers are surrounding the center, entering the center.
They're calling them Maoists. They're calling the Palestinians. That they're propagating any news item from Pakistan to say actually on the ground at the moment. Mr. Cargo, it all good. Don't know. That's about it, really.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
What happened
Sorry,
to the...
can I just ask?
Yeah.
Can I just have quick questions? Like, I mean, it's predominantly from Punjab and Haryana, but other farmers from other states joining in, do you know? Differential agricultural economy in other states, isn't it? So
Now, what is that? This is the Kirti Kirsan's struggle committee that is leading it, which was this 30 committee from Punjab that was leading it. It is now a pan-Indian Kisan movement that is taking over all this. So no Haryana committees can take a decision. No Punjab committees can take a decision without all of this being funneled through pan-Indian, they call it, I can't remember the word, Sanjukta or something like that.
Sayukta, yeah.
I think it basically, I find it very difficult to pronounce anyway, but it's like a pan-Indian organization of peasants. So everything is being filtered through them. The government tries to isolate the Haryanas or the Punjabis or the Madrasi, Madhya Pradesh and all that kind of people, but they are not at the moment, they're not succeeding. I think today I heard that, our wonderful Yogi Yadinath issued 10 lakh summons, 10 lakh rupees against every farmer leader. I mean, 10 lakh is just unheard of for these people to even pay a fine. But anyway, so these are the kind of intimidation tactics they are adopting. The other thing I think it was worth mentioning, the amount of funding the Indian farmers are getting from abroad is absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. They've got so much funds internally, but from externally, it's absolutely amazing. You're talking in terms of billions of pounds coming from outside.
How do you know that?
Whether they're going to be used.
Where do they put out this data on this? It's quite dangerous, isn't it? They will say that it is foreigners are manipulating.
Yes.
Well, that is the danger, that they will do that, and they will try and say, oh, these are Khalistanis from outside that are doing it. But the fact is, they are very public, because these stages, these platforms that are created outside on the borders of Delhi, they announce these figures daily. We have received so many thousands of rupees from Canada, so and so is donated from America, so and so is donated, and these are actually publicly announced, so they're not kept secret.
So what happened to those cows they were coming coming from Rajasthan? They had another strategy to bring cows. Did you hear about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's another issue altogether. I think if that starts to happen, it might actually muddy the water.